Hey, Earthquakes fans, welcome to another special edition of the Aftershock. I have a special guest today. I'm so excited to have him on the show for the first time. I've been on his show a couple of times. And Ted Ramey, the host of the Soccer Hour on KNBR and the radio voice of the San Jose Earthquakes. Ted, super excited to have you on. How are things?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate when the great bald minds can get together and solve world problems. So I think I'm joking, but yeah, man, I'm happy to come on. And as I've told you before in person, and now anybody else who's tuning in, the work you guys are all doing is fantastic. I know that for my drives home after the game, once I finish up my post game stuff, I'm tuning into you guys, and y'all are killing it.
And we love the Soccer Hour, and between the two of us, hopefully, the fans are getting what they need during their commutes and such.
Yeah,
So
right.
let's talk a bit about what's going on with the Earthquakes, because I mean, just since we've last talked, everything feels like it's changed, and before that, everything had changed too. And it's like this team is constantly changing, up and down. And now, a lot of draws, but a win in Seattle for the first time since 2015. And let's get into the run of form in a bit. But first, let's talk about these trade deadline moves. Jeremy Ebobisse, a 9/winger for the Portland Timbers, 24 years old, exciting prospect for a while, but maybe just not getting enough time, and certainly not getting enough time at the striker position for the Portland Timbers like he would like.
Mm-hmm.
Traded to the San Jose Earthquakes for a bit over $1 million in GAM, some accounting stuff going on there between the TAM that they've already charged for him this season, as well as again reimbursed GAM next year, puts this closer to 1.167 million in GAM. That is a huge amount of GAM, and it was taken actually from the 22 and 23 seasons. What do you think about this move? It's pretty ambitious, given that the team doesn't have a full-time general manager right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the greater narrative or the sub narrative, I'm not really sure how to what sort of definition to ascribe to it, but I think part of it is Chris Leach trying to shoot his shot, right? Like he wants to show that, hey, this is my ability. I can spot this talent. I can make things happen. I have the connections. I have the ability to make these moves happen. And that's a stark contrast to what we saw from Jesse Fioranelli, who did not work much within existing players. We saw Dominic Orduro come over in that trade. We saw Eric Remedi, and that's about it, unless I'm forgetting somebody off the top of my head, which that was Jesse's prerogative. And just, before I go any further, Jesse, I loved the guy. He was, the best dude on one-to-one. Me and him had a really good relationship. I wish that things had worked out with him, because you've said it yourself. You could tell that he really cared deeply about the club. I just want to put that out there, because I in no way want my comments to denigrate anything about Jesse, because I think the world of him. But specifically working within the league was not what he had done in the past. And I think that Chris Leach is trying to show that he can get things done and get them done quickly with Ebobisse. Even though he was born in France, he's an American citizen. He represents the United States men's national team. He's had one cap with them. He's been on some of the U23 and other youth squads. And this is a guy who ostensibly can come in and maybe be on the bench on Sunday against LAFC. I don't know. I haven't really asked that question specifically, but it is interesting just to watch the different side of the spectrum. It's the opposite of what Jesse Fioranelli had been doing. So with the move for Ebobisse, I mean, you love the speed. He's got size. He's 6 feet tall, 175 pounds. You maybe use him in the way that you saw them want to use Danny Houston at points when he was healthy, kind of getting those runs over the top. And I think that with him, and when Benji Kikanovic gets healthy again, because we saw him, he was almost like a target forward, you have more ideas of who to put up top, because Cade Cowell right now at his development, he's just trying to muscle through everybody and beat them with his speed, not his forte yet. So you can put Ebobisse up top, and then you can have Cade on the wing, and you can have Espinosa on the outside, and you can have Wando coming off the bench. You can have Chofis doing his thing. It's exciting. I think the move is really, really exciting. It is ambitious, as you alluded to, but this is Chris Leach trying to say, look, I can make moves that are going to help us in the short term and in the long term.
So Ted, definitely Ebobisse seems like a very big swing for Chris Leach. And I want to get back to Chris Leach here in a second, but another move just before the trade deadline last night, longtime veteran of the team, someone that Jesse Fiorinelli had brought in, but, maybe more than any other player who's not from MLS, came in really kind of with a love for the badge, a love for the team, put his all on the field every single time, even if it wasn't his best performance all the time. Florian Jungwirth, there's a move here that to the Vancouver Whitecaps for $200K guaranteed in GAM for 2021 and a possibility of $100K in GAM for 2022. That kind of seems like a lot of GAM. It seems like a pretty decent move, given that Flo, I believe, is 32 years old at this point. And so, on the back end of his career, when you heard this news about Flo, like, what were your immediate impressions?
My immediate impressions were it was unfortunate on a personal level because I think Flo is he's a great dude. You hit on it, the passion that he shows out there, the way that he came in and really represented the club. Those are exactly the things that you wanted to see. And he had some big moments in 2017 and he had some big moments in 2020 coming up strong. My other reaction beyond the move where I was like, okay, this, let Leach do what he wants to do right now. This is his opportunity. My other reaction was, well, that's interesting because right now you have Eric Ramey and Judson who have, Remedi's dealing with an injury. Judson is on one yellow card and then he's suspended. And then I think Ramey is on one or two and then he's suspended. I don't know off the top of my head. But Jackson Ewell is back. And Florian Jungwirth, as we saw, before he came to the Earthquakes, he played that defensive midfield position. So he had versatility. He could play the center back. He could play the six. So right now, you just traded away some depth. But I understand that if you think there's something there, you can get a good return. That makes sense. You also have the ability to plug in a Jacob Akinjuric, who has looked capable in the one very brief start he made last year before he got injured.
Right.
I believe he's been dealing with a little bit of a thigh injury, but maybe they feel right now that even if they had to go back to a two-man back line, if somebody got hurt, that they would still be able to do that because we're seeing a lot less of the classic man marking that we saw with Matias Almeida in 2019 and 2020. They've shifted to more of a zonal look, and it changes at times. I mean, we've seen Alanis come out and mark people further. We've seen Nathan chase guys around, but it seems like they're waiting until there's a certain depth on the field before they're going to make their marks. But yeah, I mean, it was just interesting because it was like, well, that's a point of strength, versatility, which is at a premium in the Matias Almeida system, which you just gave up. But at the same time, like I said, it's a good return, but also, he was a great fiery character out there. What's interesting, though, is that Nathan has a lot of those same attributes and characteristics.
Right.
And watching him out there, my reaction was kind of like, wow, this reminds me a lot of Florian Jungwirth out there. So maybe having that fiery type of guy who's a lot more emotional, which you don't get from Alanis or Tanner Beeson, is interesting to see. And that he can kind of take up that mantle that maybe Florian Jungwirth was kind of holding on to before.
Let's go ahead and get into the Nathan question. It feels like this was basically almost like Jesse Fiorinelli's last gift to the team was probably orchestrating the Nathan deal. Since he's been playing, the Quakes have not lost in games that he started. So he was sitting on the bench for the last loss against the LA Galaxy at home, which was uninspiring, very disappointing. But he didn't actually see time in that game. And then immediately after that, he started every single game, 5 draws and a win on the road against the Seattle Sounders. He does seem to have quite a bit of flow in him, and maybe even more outwardly, expression. He expresses himself more outwardly, I would say, even than Flo did at times. he just goes into a simple tackle and he's like the most excited guy in the world.
Yeah.
So how do you think like him being back there has really helped change the fortunes of this team in the short term?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that the team has improved since he's come back there and been on that back line, because I mean that was ostensibly what he was brought in to do. You have to counter that though with the fact that that was when they were starting to make that shift to the 3 center back rotation, which they had flirted with at other times, but that was kind of when they made the sudden shift. So they've got him playing along that back line, and you've got Alanis in the middle and Beeson on the left. And there's been kind of a rotation as to who the wing backs or the full backs, however you want to classify it in this system. So I think that going to a 3 center back formation was going to help the defense regardless. But at the same time, it also, when you have 2 more experienced defenders on the center and the right, it makes up for maybe some of the experience they have with Tanner Beeson on the left. Well, what's interesting with Tanner Beeson is even though he is not as experienced, he has very much a ball hawkish mentality. I mean, we remember plays this year and last year where he's been at the right place at the right time, and just, you know, whether he made clearances off the line, as he had in that game earlier this year where he had an own goal. It was kind of the tale of 2 halves for him. But he, even though he doesn't have the same amount of experience, he often is in the right place at the right time. So it's interesting to watch that. The other thing you see with the 3-man back line is they're all relatively taller.
Right.
Much taller than what we saw previously. And that's not that Guram Kasia and Florian Jungwirth were short or anything like that, but there's just more size on the back line now, which was a big problem last year towards the end with all the set piece goals. You look at that playoff game against Sporting Kansas City, and you can tell like there's not a lot of size out there. You know, Wando and Alanis were the 2 tallest guys out there. So that was something that you would pay attention to. So Nathan being good, he's looked quality since he's been here. A 3-man back line, that may be covering up more of Beeson's deficiencies and highlighting his strengths. And Beeson is getting better, don't get me wrong. It just, you have to take in his lack of experience. I think all 3 of those things kind of play into each other of what's going on right now with that back line. And it's working. They're not bleeding goals. I mean, we all remember that game against Sporting Kansas City at home, LA at home, on the road against a Orlando City, and that was when Daryl Dike just got back and was on top of the world. And I still think they're listing his weight by about 20 to 30 pounds less than what he actually weighs, because he's a monster. And
I have that same problem, Ted.
Yeah, right. People just look at us like, oh, you need to add weight. I'm like, oh. But it's interesting just to watch these corrections made, because the bigger picture though is that it's getting away from what the Matias Almeida Earthquakes were in 2019 and parts of 2020, because I think he saw that he needed to adjust, that his system with the players he had was not yielding the results that were needed. And I think that's good. I mean, that coaches, when they're at their best, maximize their players and put them in positions to succeed. And I think that he probably recognized that some of the talents were not able to do as much of what he wanted them to ask. And because he is a great coach, he said, okay, how can I put these guys in a better position to succeed? And we've seen those defensive adjustments. The problem has been the offense.
Right.
I mean, you have Cade Cowell, who is, and listen, I think the sky is the limit for Cade Cowell, but when you have a guy that's not even 18 years old yet, he's already got 4 goals and 4 assists, you can only expect so much. I think Christian Espinosa in the last 2 games has looked much more like himself, which is going to help. And I think that, you've been asking Shea Salinas to do a million things. You've had the injuries to Benji Gacanovic when it looked like he came in and could be a contributor. Chofi scores these wonder goals, but it's not like it's something you can plan on.
Right.
Like you know that if you get a low cross in and you have Wando there, he'll bury it. That's something that you can count on. But like the goals that Chofi's has scored, 3 out of the 4 being these left-footed wonders from distance, that's not, I mean, it is by design because he's capable of it, but I wouldn't say it's what you're counting on. So you need reliable offense to counter what's going on here. And that's what's going to take the Earthquakes another step forward, because they've quieted down the defense. The back line's more secure. You can tell they're a little bit more confident, but simultaneously the offense is really, backtracked and doesn't look anything like what we saw in 2019 and in parts of 2020.
It does feel like, to your point about the offense, it does feel like maybe the picking up Ebobisse is going to push Cade Cowell back out to the wing. And, the casualty there probably is Shea Salinas, who's been getting a lot of starts. he's done a great job filling in this type of situation. But if you want to get Cade Cowell that time on the wing and you want to keep Christian Espinoza on the field, it really feels like you have to be able to have that reliable pressing starting nine who can give you the tactical flexibility that you need in it. And at this point in his career, Chris Wondolowski is really no longer that. You mentioned Danny Houston. I think that's a really great comparison in terms of the type of player that they're probably looking for, but they probably would want a better presser out of that. But one of the things that Houston was fantastic at doing was running into space and being able to get balls in behind. And now he's a threat. And you think about the type of pace that they would have on those front three now, that's pretty exciting to think about for sure.
Yeah, and I also look at the fact that, Shea Salinas is very, very effective off the bench. He has shown at various points that, he's so fast and he's such in good shape that he's going to come on and just be a stud as a super sub. So, not that Shea Salinas isn't great as a starter, but he also has that capability as a guy coming off the bench. With Wondo, the other thing that's been a problem this year is when he's been out there, it's like they just sit guys around him. He doesn't have any space to make anything happen. So if you can have more problems out there, Cowell on the wing, Ebobisse up top, have Christian Espinoza on the wing, get Wondo out there as well. Maybe there's less pressure on him. And then also if Espinoza is starting to look more like himself, maybe you will see a few more of these low crosses that Wondo can take advantage of, because that type of ball hasn't been there very often. And he got one of those 2 games ago and buried it on a classic one-touch Wondo goal, but then they disallowed it because Rios had stepped out of play before, or had let the ball get out of play before he brought it back in, which was unfortunate. So, I still think it's there for Wondo. We just got to have the ability to get those balls into him.
So let's circle back to the Chris Leach question, Ted, because, these were 2 sizable moves. You're moving out a player who's been a staple of this team now for several years, as well as bringing in someone who is not yet proven, as the player, but certainly has that high potential. It does feel like a bit of a big swing from Chris Leach. And as you mentioned, it does come across as this feeling of this is his way of trying to show that he can actually do the job, of the general manager. If you just think about the position of general manager, and like you said, I really enjoy Jesse Fiorinelli, particularly when you catch him one-on-one. Yeah. He's just such a great person to talk to. And I think he had a lot of great qualities. In fact, I think he had a lot of great qualities that were underused by the club, like his ability just to speak multiple languages and communicate. I would have liked to see him in front of a camera a lot more and be an ambassador in the area into different communities, because I thought he had that ability that was never used. And that's just kind of my impression of what was kind of like lacking from the GM position. Like I wanted to see more of that, me personally. And I've written at length about this on Quakes Epicenter. But for you, what is it that, regardless if it's Chris Leach or it's somebody else that is selected, what is it that you really kind of want to see happen or change or improve coming out of that particular, office? And do you think this is going to be someone who kind of steps up into this greater chief soccer officer role, lacking a president in the club right now? Or are we just going to see more of these type of top level executives that'll take on these roles?
Yeah, I saw that term cited, the chief soccer officer or chief soccer operating officer. I don't remember the exact terminology that was used. But I think that in terms of the priorities is you want someone just in terms of the first team who's going to be able to bring in talent that is going to immediately make an impact and is going to be able to contribute and is going to be able to do things, that help the team win. I thought that, Jesse's initial moves, Florian Jungwirth, Jamir Hika, Danny Houston, they all came in and made an impact right off the start in 2017. And then you had the acquisition of Vaco. He scored in his first appearance in New York, and then he scored a huge goal against the Whitecaps in the second to last game of the year that put them in great position against Minnesota in the final game of the year. And you had, those guys came in and made impacts. And then, there was Joel Kleberg, who was not the greatest player, unfortunately. But, I understood why, you think you have a good value guy. You can maybe come in and contribute. But Vaco was a good signing. I thought Gurumkashi was a good signing. I think that, it's been more hit or miss. Carlos Fierro, when he's been healthy, since about the halfway point of 2020, has been pretty good. He just hasn't been healthy. He's had some big plays. Just unfortunately, he hasn't been out there. Andy Rios hasn't been consistent. He's had some big goals. Think of that backheel goal against Vancouver at the MLS's back, but it just hasn't been consistent. So I think what you need is our guys that can be very consistent. And also another guy, Christian Espinosa. I don't think there was any Almeida connection there. I think that was just a guy that Jesse was scouting, and he turned into a player. And so, I think that you want more of those type of players that can always come in and be consistent contributors. And I think that's got to be the priority. But I think there's been a weird view of some of the talents that Jesse brought in. Like, people don't realize that those players, like Danny Houston, when he was healthy, he was a double-digit goal scorer in 2018 and had some big goals in 2017. And, Jamir Hiko, Florian Jungwirth, these guys were contributors. There's a weird viewpoint that's been put on those guys. And also, Magnus Eriksson was another guy who was polarizing among Quakes fans, and I didn't understand why. And I hope that they see, a year and a half later, that since he's left the team, they've not been the same on offense. That even though he wasn't the paciest guy, he controlled things well in that, center attacking mid position and made forward advancing passes successfully. But I think the consistency with the talent, and also, I don't know if it's necessarily not getting foreign guys, because guys can come from anywhere. If they want to come in and win, whatever, but it delays things when you're having to deal with citizenship issues, green cards, stuff like that. It delays it. And, Judson this year, he was away getting his green card and wasn't there in the preseason. And I think that, only in the last few games has Judson looked like Judson that we remember. And I think those are types of the issues of why Chris Leach, is looking at these guys who can come in and be out there immediately and not have the delays. Because, listen, I believe one of the things that makes, soccer the beautiful game is that you get these people from all over the world playing together. And I think that's one of Major League Soccer's greatest selling points is when you look out on a field, there's the world in front of you. Your fan base is, there's people who, I know there are people in the Bay Area that have Georgian roots. I'm sure being able to watch Vaco and Gurumkashi meant something to them. Just as any team, when you have something that any type of selling point can be a selling point. But I also do think that if you can get guys who do not have any of the tie-ups with the P1 visas or the green cards or any of that, that's not a bad thing either. But to the greater point, it's just the GM has to be able to make impactful signings that come in and contribute. And I think that, maybe one of the reasons there wasn't more of a desire to get a top-tier striker is you have had Wando. And I think last year, even if that's a 34-game season, he probably has double-digit goals yet again. Right. But the injuries added up with Houston. I think you probably expected more of a finishing touch from Christian Espinosa. And, Wando still does his thing. So you look at all those things and you say, okay, Wando's not going to go forever. I mean, he's given Father Time a run for his money, but eventually it will force him out. You have the GM has to be able to sign those guys that can come in and be the consistent double-digit goal scorers. And Christian Espinosa, I mean, he's been a very, very consistent player. 13 assists in a 34-game season in 2019. 9 last year in a shortened season. And I think that if he catches fire here at the end, which is certainly possible, that could turn into that. You need more guys like Christian Espinosa. You hope that Ebobisse would be a signing just like that. You hope that, these other guys that would be able to come in and be contributors, consistent contributors. And I am consistently coming back to consistent contributor because that's the one thing I keep on coming back to is you need more of those guys that can be, just game in, game out reliable. And that to me is paramount. When you start talking about beyond that and looking at the academy and looking at the other different structures that's a big or broader discussion that would take too much time to get into. But when I'm talking about the first team, it's got to be the acquisition of immediate impact players.
You and I could start our own podcast on these other topics, I'm sure.
I'm sure we could go, people would tune in for 6 hours of us talking about, Santa Clara County and meetings. It would go on and on and on. We would enjoy it. I don't know if everybody else would enjoy it, but
potentially not. And you mentioned the foreign players. one of the things that's really interesting to me is I think very quietly the Quakes are building a base of young American players or players who, are going to be, permanent citizens, here. And just the signing of Ebobisse, now you've got, JT Marcinkowski, you've got Tanner Beeson, you've got Jackson Ewell, so you're really now seeing the Quakes, I believe, start to build that. And there's players that we aren't seeing as much of, like a Jack Scahan and Eric Cavillo, who has been loaned out to Orange County, but can be recalled at any time. I think a lot of people are concerned that he's gone and he can't help, but certainly if he's needed, Matias Almeida can call him back to your earlier point about depth at that center mid position. So I think it feels like very quietly that base is starting to be created, and now Jeremy Ebobisse as a U.S. men's national team prospect, fills another spot of American players that the team is beginning to rely more and more on. Let's talk real quick about the playoffs. The Quakes, as it sits, are a little bit more than a win out of the playoff position at this point. Do you feel that the moves that have been made, the Nathan signing, the Ebobisse signing, obviously had to trade away Florian Jungwirth in order to get some of the GAM back that was spent on the Ebobisse trade. But do you feel that this team is now set up with a good possibility of finding a way to get into, one of the last 2 or 3 playoff spots?
Yeah, and I know that some people might say that's wishful thinking, but I think that part of the problem this year has been that to have a dream season, you need guys to play to their ceiling. You need, Wando to be Wando. You need Cade Cowell to be all of his potential, Espinosa to be all of his potential, Chofis to all of his potential. You go down the list and you talk player after player after player. I think that, if you look at earlier in this year, I think maybe Jackson Ewell's maybe a little bit tired from doing all the national team stuff, and he hadn't been quite up to his normal level. Christian Espinosa had not been up to his level. I think that you had guys that weren't playing up to their capabilities, and I'm not blaming them for anything on that. I mean, I just think that was the reality. Is guys were not playing to their ultimate capability of excellence, and I think that the Earthquakes are due for a correction in that, and I think we've seen it with Christian Espinosa in the last couple of games. I think he's starting to look much more like his usual self. And I think that with the acquisition of Ebobisse and with Nathan and the newer formations that they're using to try and maximize their defensive abilities, I mean, you're only a few points out, a handful of points. There's no reason why this can't change over the next 16 games. And the fact that the Earthquakes, and this is what I was talking about in my post game on Wednesday night, if the Earthquakes had gotten all these road draws in 2019, there's a good chance they make it into the playoffs. They didn't get these road points previously, or games where they were in a position to get a point on the road, they didn't. And I think that if we had gone back to that point, we probably all said, if they had only been able to get a point in Atlanta, or if they'd only been able to get a point in NYCFC, or you go down the list, that didn't happen. This year, it feels like they are earning those points on the road. And hopefully if they can start winning at home with the acquisition of Ebobisse and Nathan kind of making things more solid along the back line, that you will be able to rack up those points at home. Because if you win at home and you get points on the road, that's a recipe for getting into the playoffs. And I feel like we're doing one half of that, the harder part, to getting the points on the road. Now it's time for this team to win at home, something they haven't done since the start of May. It's been a while. So if they can get those road wins and keep on getting, earning road draws, they'll climb up the standings. And they've got 3 in a row at home now. And it's a perfect opportunity for them to do so before they go back out onto the road and take on the Galaxy. And hopefully, if they're, continuing this run of improved form, they'll be able to get a little bit of revenge for what happened here on the 26th of June. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ted. And this has been great. You and I don't usually get a chance to catch up in a longer form like this, and it's been fantastic for me to play host and to have you as a guest, and the shoes on the other foot. I'm certainly not the host that you are, but I've really enjoyed getting your perspectives on some of the latest things going around the San Jose Earthquakes. And we'll look forward to talking with you again in the near future.
Yeah, man. No, don't knock yourself down. You do a great job hosting, and you got me talking. So I apologize for taking up too much of your time as I do get going. But yeah, man, I think there's reason to be hopeful right now. I think a couple of weeks ago it was a little bit more of a negative feeling around the Quakes, but now it feels like things are taking positive steps, and I'm excited to see where this goes. And now. We can keep on doing the exchange. I was on yours. Now you can come back on mine. We can do this again. And, I'm just looking forward to when I'm traveling again so that when I'm up in Seattle, like in a normal year, I would have been able to see you on Wednesday night. Who knows when society will turn to normal? That's another 7 or 8 hour podcast.
Yes. Let's not even bring in the COVID topic. We could be here for much, much longer. Well, Ted, again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll look forward to your broadcast of LAFC coming up this weekend. Take care.
Peace. Go Quakes.